Okay, thanks for joining the Think Big session. We have, looks like only a couple of things here on the agenda. So I did want to, we can talk through these, but also feel free in now or anytime to add ideas to here as well. It shouldn't be just Ian and I adding to this. But let's go through, it looks like Ian, you added an agenda item for interview data and information.
Nope, I was trying to copy a schedule and you already did it, so
Oh,
I just made a mess.
okay. Okay, so I had two ideas that I thought would be worth adding and possibly discussing this week. So the first actually just came up in Slack and in our co-working day in Colorado. Ian and Steve and I were talking about why do people buy the product, or buy our stage, why do they want to use it? And a big reason that we hear over and over again from buyers is I want to cancel either JFrog or Sonotype Nexus or something like that. They want to cancel their existing service, and the thing we always hear is, when can I just use GitLab? When can I cancel this contract? And so Steve and Ian and I were talking last week about that, is saying, well, what does that mean for our users? Probably means that they want a very easy way to migrate from JFrog to GitLab, at least for our existing registries. So I wanted to just bring up that idea and say, does anyone have, what has to be true for us to do that successfully? And when you think of good migration strategies that you've had from in other applications, what's worked really well or what's been really frustrating?
I can add one other thing that we kind of discussed in person that might give some good context was, so right now, all of our packages are connected to a project. And so if a company or organization is trying to migrate everything in at once, they might not have those projects on GitLab yet, or it might be sprinkled in a variety of different places. So one thing we might want to look at is there a way to allow people to migrate packages and upload packages to the registry that are not associated with any given project?
That's a good add. Thanks, Steve. So yeah, that was kind of the idea that we were talking about, is what does an easy migration look like? How would someone migrate a package that's not associated with the given project? And how would we cover repositories or registries that we don't have coverage for yet? So if I'm at JFrog and I have Maven, NPM, and Python, how will we handle that in a migration? Do we just say, oh, we only cover these? So we're just thinking about the user experience a little bit too.
One thing I want to call out about the experience here is that for a lot of companies, when they're switching over to GitLab and want to use the package registries, this is their first experience with us. And as a set it and forget it, this is the memory that will hold the longest weight. So I think I want to call out that it's kind of valuable to make sure the experience is really pleasant as well as, technically capable, while we're thinking about how do we handle somebody migrating that has a package manager we may not support yet, just to kind of call out.
An idea that just came out from this, would it be a possible first step to actually have like a template project with inside pipelines specialized for every registry that we are bringing in, that just run through the registry and bring into this project, so they, even if they don't have project, they still have all their packages in one single project inside GitLab, and then maybe we can work on to have this project move, these packages move from one project to the other inside our system, which is much easier.
So when you, go ahead.
So I was going to say, don't we also need to tackle the problem of the NPM scopes and how they're scoped to project names? Because obviously, like if you're bringing in from JFrog or something like that, the scope isn't necessarily going to match. I know we've got some issues for opening up the scoping of NPM projects, haven't we?
I think that's going to be true for all of the package management systems. We're going to have to revisit how we deal with names because yeah, that's exactly right. Is that on any given package manager, people are going to have established names. They're not going to necessarily want to change. And so we need a way to manage that. And I think that's kind of a complicated problem because we do need a way to find the package, associate it with either an organization or a project or at least a group of some sort. And so like, can we do that without having to change the names? And if so, like how would that necessarily work?
Would it be possible that we use the namespace and just say you're part of an org, and then we copy the namespace of what you had? If you don't already have a project with that name in your instance, then the namespace becomes the project that just holds all of the associated things, even if the rest of the project is empty. Is that a way to think about it?
I think that's one possibility. I feel like that's sort of a way that we can use pieces we already have to put things together. But I'm wondering, like, if because at the same time, it's why do we need the project if it's not really if it's just kind of like a container. So it's I feel like there should be another way to group things together that doesn't use a structure that isn't necessarily needed, if that makes sense.
It's kind of a silly question. Can an instance just have a registry not attached to anything else? Just kind of is attached to their instance? So to mimic the JFrog account, right? Just move it all over to the same empty, unconnected bucket.
I might be wrong, but I think every instance does, to an extent, have their own registry. And it's just a matter of like our code constricts them to specific naming aspects. And so I think that's one of the other items we kind of talked about in the past is that perhaps if we know that someone's on self-managed and they have their own instance, they should be able to say, we have unlimited naming rights. Like we'll manage our possible naming conflicts. And then we only have to worry about something like GitLab.com, where there's a lot of different organizations working on the same registry.
Could we somehow link a package registry with a group? So I know we have group level access for registries from projects, but could we like create an empty group and just use the package registry linked to it?
Can you say that again? I don't think I understood it.
So right now the package registries are quite linked to projects. And what if we, I'm sorry, I'm reading silence. What if we just take this registry object and we linked it with a group instead of linking it with a project, so that we can create an empty group and it will have a package registry, and then we can use that for anything without having the project first.
Yeah, like I think the concern there is like if we think about, and I may be misunderstanding some of that point as well. I mean, if we think about this as being, I have a package that I want to pull in from some other package manager solution like Artifactory, that is one part of it. But in theory, the code should be appearing as well. So if we are just pulling in dependencies that are just package managers, packages we're never going to update because we don't have the code, that makes sense to do an import. But if the code is part of this import, then we would need a repository for the code to be able to then generate the package again. So like, I don't know whether that's sort of incorporated in the way people are thinking. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Maybe that's wrong. I think static imports of packages that were developed in the past and built in the past is something, push them up and save them somewhere. But I don't know how often we would be seeing customers wanting to bring in code packages that are disassociated from the generating code. Maybe that's an edge case more than it's something that we need to really worry about in terms of like how we build the solution. But I'm thinking repository comes in, it needs to be in a project here so that we can then start generating that package for the customer with all of the other stuff we've been talking about, like automated builds and all that other stuff.
So for our users, having that unattached registry will serve at least a stopgap for them so that they can shut down JFrog. So I'm just going to pull all my packages. There's a bunch of them. I'm sure one day they'll all get updated, but I just want a place to put them so I can cancel it, or Artifactory or whoever. So there's value in that. And then I wonder if there's a clever way we can start pulling them apart, maybe by namespace, into projects and give them a way to make the full shift and then start organizing it and connecting it to the different aspects. I do know a couple of users have called out that they have packages that haven't been updated in 4 years and they're still getting used, but they're not really attached to anything anymore. So I know people are experiencing it. It's not my favorite situation, but it is happening.
And one thing to add about the sort of overall architecture here is that, so we have a project that has the code that builds a package, and then we have the packages that are built by that code. Generally, and in most other systems that I've seen, like those are not coupled in any way. Once you've generated the package and pushed it, you're pushing it to just like a place for storage where then you can access it in the future. Certainly, you know, the whole benefit of having the code and the package in the same place is that we'll be able to add all of these really cool and beneficial features. But I do think that there might be like, a first step towards that might be, okay, if they just need to be able to, like, even if they already have their code on GitLab and their project name is foo, but they're publishing a package that's called like stats. They want to maybe just change the remote so that stats gets published to GitLab registry, and then they can worry about implementing and connecting it to their project and working with those additional features as sort of step 2 of that migration process.
I don't want to, I hear you both saying the same thing, and maybe there's a bit of different approach here. So I'm not saying we don't need that. I'm kind of, I guess what I'm trying to call out here is that a solution that's valuable for our general customer base? As an ongoing thing, we're effectively saying you can disassociate any of the package managers, and in fact, the container registry could make the same argument, right? We can disassociate it from the code. It's not being really linked. It's just a part of our system that you can enable and use if you want to use it, and you can just push stuff up to it. We have no association. It's not related to the code. I guess my main concern there is that as GitLab, what value are we providing that's GitLab-y? And so I think if this is a case that our customers think is useful, great, cool. Let's try to figure out a way to make it work. If it's something that we think is a possibility of being useful, great. But I think the impact, I'd be concerned about the impact of that on the value prop that we have for, okay, we're talking about building templates. We're saying we are the complete life cycle, and it's like, yeah, you just throw packages in randomly, and how we integrate that with the rest of the UX and all that kind of stuff is, maybe that creates a whole separate branch of thinking about how we display what packages are in the package manager, how our customers would interact with those things. That maybe we can talk about a bit more. In theory, I think that the package managers, they're all there. The endpoints are available. You can push stuff to it. If you can go npm publish or whatever, you can just configure it and send it. So I think it's possible right now. Anyway, I'll stop rambling.
Yeah, that was good points, I think, Dan. I'm wondering what questions do we have to ask to get our heads wrapped around this better? Because we could start talking to users and customers and saying, why is this valuable, and like what would you expect to happen? But are there any specific engineering concerns that you think that we should talk to users about? Is it the things we've mentioned already, like how packages are tied to projects or groups and how they would expect that to work, and naming conventions are the big things we're concerned about, or is there anything else?
Yeah,
I mean, I think one question. Oh, go ahead.
Go, Steve. You got it.
Yeah, I think like a couple of the questions that would be certainly worth asking, especially any customers that are interested in importing right now, are, you know, if they've attempted to move anything over, what is prohibiting them from doing that? Is it the naming change? Is it that they have to have a project connected? You know, that can answer some of these sort of questions. And then also, you know, maybe, I don't know if this is a good strategy or not, but like, you know, mention some of these things we've talked about to plant the seed in their head of like, these are some possible solutions we could take, and see if any of those sort of spark a like, oh yeah, that would actually be really awesome if we could do that. Like, I don't know if that's the right way to go about it, because we don't want to like sway people in one way or another based on our own bias.
So there's a cool way, just to jump right in there, there's a cool way during UX research where you can ask them to tell a story of the last time they tried to do it, ask how they would solve the problem, and after you've gathered all that information and gotten the unbiased view, then you give them the free cookie, where it's like, well, what if this was here? Would that solve your use case? So you ask all the non-biased questions, and then you get the binary cookie answer. So it is totally possible. That's just what I wanted to say.
This is why I'm glad you're talking to the people.
I was going to say that Ian probably has a reasonably good idea of how to do this type of thing.
So it seems like the issue is like, I don't know, dangling packages where they're just kind of in storage and they're on a shelf somewhere and they're not currently used, but they want to preserve them. Is that like kind of the overall thing that the problem is, or is it just?
I don't know about dangling. I think it's more of a, so like if you've got project A over here and you know you've published packages from it, and maybe it's, you know, not even really in use anymore, you're publishing them to a remote somewhere. What if we published them to the GitLab remote, but once it's there, it's not really associated to that project at that point. It's just there. So you can still push and pull using that same package name to that same remote, but it's not associated with the project. Does that create any problems or concerns? And is it even worth doing?
Another thing I just want to add about that kind of same story, it may not necessarily be dangling packages forever. It could also be, all right, my boss told me we need to switch to GitLab by the end of the year. I have a bunch of packages that aren't going to fit anywhere in the architecture, but I still need to put them somewhere. And that's kind of the story that I've been hearing so far, and I definitely want to dive in and explore it more. But it does feel less about, this is an archive of our package manager from the past and we just want it forever. It's more of, I don't have time right now to put every package in a place yet, but I still need to put it somewhere. And that's part of what they're trying to solve, is not needing to have all of the answers at the beginning of the process.
I think as Steve called out earlier, if that is on GitLab.com, then we have all of the considerations around naming conventions. And so how they go to find things, if they've got build scripts that they're using to actually go and generate stuff that rely on certain paths, then that's just not going to work. Well, at least we can't guarantee it, right? Like some customer might already have that project name or group name or whatever, and then it just straight up won't work. So I think I'm just paraphrasing what Steve said earlier, but I think that's actually going to be the biggest issue here, and therefore it won't be a straight copy paste for the current solution for any sort of package that they just want to sort of store somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. I think you understand this better than most. So
no, I think that's totally right. GitLab.com is a strange situation, because if two companies want to import the same name project, they can't do that. on GitLab.com. On a self-managed instance, there's no reason why we should prevent that, I don't think. But on GitLab.com, that can't be allowed because at some point someone might say npm install this package name or maven install this package name, and how do we determine which package it is or who it belongs to just by the name?
But that's, sorry, I think the thing there is how do we solve the problem of, let's just say, I mean, in theory, if they're already publishing somewhere public, they've already run into some scoping concerns anyway that are associated with an account or a project on whatever side that is. In a shared environment, unless I'm misunderstanding the way JFrog does it, unless they've got like walled gardens for all of the customers and they can do all of their own naming conventions unassociated, then maybe they've already dealt with this problem. But how do we solve it? Like, what's the solution to this? Do we force scoping based on what our structure is, and then they just have to adapt what their old 4-year-old process is for pulling that package down? Like, I don't think there's any concern with that. I'm good with that as a way to move forward, but we just have to understand what steps are required to say to a customer, hey, pull it in here, but your scoping changes.
If we look at it from the point of view of npm, the only thing that will change is the leftmost part of the scope, and they are already required to have like a grouping part, otherwise they can't do custom registries. So for example, GitLab package starts with @GitLab and then /UI/SDG or whatnot. And we could use group and subgroups to solve that. I don't know if this applies to all the package manager, but it will be a minor change just to alter the leftmost part of the scope everywhere, because it's actually a constant that changes everywhere. So I think we could use that.
Could we, I think this came up, I think Ian, you might have brought this up in Denver last week. Could we build a pipeline that goes through all of an organization's repositories, maybe with some rules in place and will create a commit or some sort of merge request to update the package name in all of the places that it's identified in, so that, if you have import this package name, it will update it to the new scope. Is that something that would be feasible?
I mean, it's something that you can automatize, I think. It's simple regex rules. Then if it's practical to do so or practical to use, that's another question, but definitely it's feasible, I think.
Well, this was really, really helpful. It sounds like, Ian, this is definitely worth opening up a problem validation issue, and we could do some research on this and get some more answers. And then we could, once we have those answers, we could talk through a bit more of the, yes, Stan, that was true. All of these things that we're talking about will be turned into issues. This is just, we haven't done it yet. Okay, so yeah, we will open this up as a research issue, and we'll talk through this over time. The other thing that I wanted to discuss was another thing that we talked about in Denver, which we do need to open an issue for, is an idea that originally came from, actually, Dan, your friend, I think Greg, that you introduced me to. When he was talking about the value of JFrog, he was saying one of the most valuable pieces for him is the Maven settings file. I guess it's settings.xml. You can set the priority order for which you look for packages from. So you look first, he wants to look from their JFrog instance, then they want to look from the Maven server, then they have another S3 server set up somewhere that they want to pull things from. And so the idea of having a remote server for different repositories, so you could point to multiple locations. So you could say like, okay, pull first from npm, then from GitLab, then from JFrog. So that was another idea that we were talking about, is the idea of a virtual and a local server that you could push packages and pull packages from, and then we would proxy requests and according to the priority order that you set. So that was another thing that we talked briefly over. I probably have a picture on my phone if I knew where that was, but I'll pause there for a second. Steve, do you think I missed anything?
No, I think that was the general idea was being able to set the priority of remotes that are checked as you are trying to install or find repository or packages. I mean, one thing that would be beneficial, and this ties into that first item we discussed, is this could also be a first step to the import process. Is, well, right now they've got their JFrog remote, they've got their NPM remote, they've got this remote. So switch everything to the GitLab remote, and then the logic in GitLab will go through and identify which registry to pull from. So the first step is update all of the code to only pull from GitLab, and then GitLab pulls from the other locations, and then eventually after the full import, they don't have to change any more code. But that's one tie-in to the previous item as well.
So it's kind of a step in that direction. It's like, well, we'll just have it all in GitLab. Even if you don't migrate anything, you could slowly migrate it once it's there. You could still see it. You could still see details and maybe copy a pull command to download it or something like that, but you don't have to worry about migrating everything on day one.
But I think the overall benefit here is that you can set one remote and not have to worry about configuring the rest. So if you have a bunch of private packages for JavaScript, and then you're also using packages that are hosted on NPM and GitHub, someone has to manage all of that. Whereas if we have this priority listing type of a deal, you can, like, one person can set that within GitLab, and then all of the projects, and then as long as you're using the GitLab remote, it will pull based off of that, if that makes sense.
I think sorry, Haley, go ahead. I feel like you've turned your mic on a few times.
Yeah. So with the request priorities, maybe we could combine that. If they do kind of this all at once import, maybe that could be imported to like some kind of like namespace, like a import project that's kind of namespaced, and then you could have like the local to the package path, and then if it's not there, check the import path and then move on. If that makes sense. I don't. That seems kind of like the temporary thing that could become permanent, but that's just an idea.
I like that idea. And one thing I wanted to call out on that is something that came up in 2 different interviews is that DevOps want to be able to monitor how good a migration is going. And part of that could be identifying, saying, you asked GitLab to manage these priorities. So, 84% of you have moved over to GitLab, their registry, which is awesome. And then there's these 10 packages that are still going to NPM. So we should check on those. And they would like to see that kind of data to know if everything is actually making it over, or kind of to your point, is this a temporary solution to a permanent problem, or the other way around? So that could be a way that we work around that, is actually showing them the data of this is how much has been coming from this location.
Yeah, I was going to say my big concern on this particular area is the authentication problem. So if we are hitting other registries on behalf of customers, we need to have their auth info to get to NPM or JFrog or anything like that. So I have a concern that our code then has to have the correct auth information to be able to do those things. In my head, at least, and there may be other things in my head, at least, that's the biggest technical issue I'd see here. I'm not sure if Pete's have thoughts on how we would do that in a way that doesn't cross some lines in terms of what information we're storing on behalf of a customer.
Could they use environment variables to do it? Like we could document the process, and as part of it, they can create environment variables that'd be like JFrog user ID and password, and then they wouldn't have to put their actual. They wouldn't have to have their tokens in code. They could just have the environment variables.
Yeah, but where are those environment variables stored?
In
the content? Right, and that may be fine. I'm not saying that's actually a problem for people, but that would be a required step. And then we then have to understand how to authenticate against any package repository, whatever it might be, npm, jprog, maven, sonatype, we have to know programmatically how to actually access that and authenticate against it. And that's not always super straightforward. I'm not speaking from experience working with those package managers, just from experience working with authoring against other services can often be quite painful.
Is this going to also overlap? Like, it sounds like some of what we're describing here kind of overlaps with the idea of the dependency proxy, where we are, able to pull packages from other places. But with the authentication aspect, it's pretty much the dependency proxy for private packages. Like if I have a private package hosted on npm, but I wanted to use GitLab's dependency proxy for it, would we run into that same problem probably?
Yeah, we would. And I think as we start trying to integrate, I think steps in my head, again, none of this is meant to be like we have to do it this way or anything like that, but like steps in my head to, like right now, we're only working with our container registry and what layers it's getting from upstream. And then when we go to implement that for package managers, then we're going to have to start thinking about, okay, well, how are we proxying this? How is this working? What is the actual main use case? Is it just the CI pipeline builds where we're trying to have the local thing on the machine that then they can go pull it, doesn't have to keep going and getting it? If it's then an external repository, then we have to work out how to do auth anyway. So I think you're right, Steve, that we have to solve that problem anyway. But it's, in my head at least, it's a couple of steps out from where we're at right now. I may be wrong there, Tim. I'm not sure where we're thinking about implementing the dependency proxy on behalf of our package managers. So that might be, I thought it was like maybe second quarter next year or something like that was where we're expecting to do that.
Yeah, but we're talking long term, thinking big. So I love these discussions. It's really helpful. Yeah, I think that's a good call out on authentication. We do authenticate now for the dependency proxy to Docker Hub. So I think it not from the GitLab registry. So I think we are doing it, but I agree there's going to be a lot of gotchas there. Like for npm, for example, we had to learn that we could only use OAuth tokens, and we had to change our personal access token. So I think that's a good call out.
Does anyone else? Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from a competitive standpoint, when we compare our product to the other leaders out there like JFrog and Sonatype, they all have this concept of local and virtual repositories set up. So it's just something that I think users are going to expect as part of this idea of, if they're going to move from Sonatype or JFrog to GitLab, they're going to expect the concept of being able to prioritize a list of remote repositories as needed.
I was going to mention, I'm pretty sure Azure DevOps does that with their npm registry. You kind of you point it at Azure DevOps, and then from there, it'll either fetch local ones or it'll go out to npm.com. So that's similar.
Thanks, Nathan.
And that could be a good starting point is to start, you fetch from GitLab, and then if not, only just fetch from the main public repository. And then, the idea of setting up additional private repositories to fetch from could come later, if at all, because that seems a lot more complicated.
Well, I think if the model of storage, so if just for simplicity's sake for now, if we're talking about npm, right? And they all support a protocol, the npm's API interface, which they should, because they're all supposed to work with npm, the command line tool. Then we should actually be able to communicate with the other repositories using that same protocol without having to go, oh, you've got to think of a whole new way of talking to, Sonatype as opposed to Maven, or npm, or as opposed to, say, GitHub's implementation of it, because it actually should support the same protocol. It's more about each time, at least in my head, is I'm thinking about it like, if we can support one, we should be able to support the others using the same thing, but that's an open question, right? Like,
maybe we could try it for npm, since it seems like npm might be the most straightforward. Maybe that's true. I don't know if Maven is more straightforward, but we have the most experience with npm on the team. Maybe it would be a good use case to try and solve it for npm first, and then we could we can go from there.
Isn't probably this was already mentioned up until now, but just to reinforce it, isn't this like actually a very good way to allow user to bulk import all their stuff just by running a dependency proxies and have a nice interface and say, hey, you managed to import 87% of your packages. All up until now, you never touched this. Maybe you don't really need them. Click here to import the rest.
Yeah, in theory, that's what I was thinking in terms of migrating our container registry when we have if we eventually have a non-upgradable replacement for it, was in theory, you could just go pull and push and it's done. Like, it's not a clean, fast way to do it, but you know that anything they can access, they can pull out and then pull in again. So I think my main concern with the dependency proxy is it's intended to be time boxed, as far as I understood. It's not meant to store stuff forever, because then we run into the same problem we always have. So I'd worry that if that would be kind of going against the basic idea of the proxy, of saying, oh, we pull this thing in the proxy and then you keep it forever. I like the idea of using that logic and saying, oh, we have this external repository to sort of build on what you and Steve both said. I think I like the idea of saying, oh, this is our GitLab's our primary now because we've moved, but we have this as our original. So say it's NPM because that's where all everything comes from, or say it's Sonatype, or sorry, not Sonatype, JFrog or some other system. And then we just start pulling them in and saying, hey, do you want to save this? I think that's a good idea. But I think the only, like I said, the concern there is whether that really matches the model of what a dependency proxy is supposed to be. Because we should be caring about the life of those packages and how much we end up storing, because that will become a problem, I think.
But would it be this a good way to, like, we tell the user, okay, we grab it, we have it for 3 months, and then like a 2 months and a reminder and say, hey, you can take this package from the dependency proxy, like correctly put in the right registry because it interests you, or no, it's not, just trash it and the dependency proxies will let it go.
It would be really cool from a UX perspective if we could tell them that instead of asking them, and say like, hey, we're pulling this package from the dependency proxy. You don't have it in an actual storage, but we're pulling it all the time. It is getting like regularly downloaded. It seems like you should move this one over because that's where it should belong with the rest of your stuff, and kind of give them that information ahead of time. Does that make sense, or does that end up being more confusing from a developer perspective?
Just want to ask, why would the dependency proxy be a manual thing? Wouldn't this be automatic? So say your pipeline is pulling a bunch of packages down from either locally or NPM or whatever. Surely the point of the dependency proxy is to cache those automatically so that the next job that runs 5 minutes later would use those cached assets. And the user doesn't care. The user doesn't want to be clicking yes to 50 million packages NPM packages that they've got installed in their massive JavaScript project. They just want to know that their next build in the future is going to be faster than the first build. And surely that's the point of the dependency proxy. And then you could do things like you could track when a particular package is pulled from the proxy. And then if it hasn't been pulled in, say, 30 days, then you could start garbage collecting packages that aren't being pulled regularly. And then that way it just becomes a completely automatic process that the user doesn't care about. All they care about is their faster incremental builds or pipelines in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of what I was thinking. Thank you for doing a better job than I did, Nick. Of like, I like the idea of sort of having reports for people for what the dependency proxy is storing, so they could go look at it. And Ian, I think you called that out earlier as something that customers would find valuable, of like, oh, this came from this location and you're using this all the time and stuff like that. That could be, that sort of report or that interface could be a place where customers could say, oh, wow, we're still using this. Let's pull it into our, previous topic, anonymous sort of unconnected storage for this type of package. But I think you call out a good point here, Nick, which is that if we are looking at this as an automated pipeline process, the interaction isn't a real-time interaction. It is something that happens later, where a customer might be, or even an engineer is like, oh, I built this thing, I looked at my pipeline, it worked, no problem. They're not going to necessarily be calling out there that something happened. Although, just a side point, it'd be awesome to have like a pipeline going, oh, I got this from the proxy or whatever. I don't know. I think that'd be cool. But.
Cool. Anything else on Steve? You want to jump in there?
I was just going to add that, yeah, like I think because we do have this interesting aspect where a lot of these things can overlap and can be built upon in very cool ways, it is important to always remember like the primary reason for any given feature or system, so that we don't start to mutate it in a way that wasn't the initial goal.
Wow.
And I think adjusting what the system is intended to do to match our customers' needs is fine. But us going, why don't we just throw stuff over there? That's maybe a little bit more of a distinction on how we maybe should think about it. If it's a temporary, like I think maybe Haley was calling this out earlier, if it's a temporary solution to a permanent problem, then maybe we could justify it, but we need to justify it in a way that satisfies an ongoing requirement in the long run. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
So for these two things that we talked about today, and there were probably a bunch of ideas. The way that it will work now is we'll put this on the problem validation track for product. So that means that we open up issues, they go in our problem validation backlog, and then from there, to validate that, we have to go through a process of similar to what we did recently for the survey. So we would talk to users, we could survey users. The end output is we create this opportunity canvas that gets reviewed by product and design leadership. And then once they say, okay, you've validated that this is a problem, now go validate a solution. So then we could test, like, would this work? And then it would get moved to the build track where we'd actually work on it. So I guess I'm just saying all of that to say there are a lot of unanswered questions here, but part of the process for us to move this forward would be to answer these questions from a user's perspective. And then when we get to the build track, to start thinking about it, like, how do we actually solve this now technically? Is it feasible? And things like that. So I think these are both worthy of validating with our users that this is something that they want to do, and that it would be useful, and that it makes sense for GitLab. I think those are the three questions that I have for myself.
Haley, did you want to verbalize that? Sorry, you were already talking, my bad.
Yeah, it's okay. So to add on to Steve's point about making sure that we don't creep into different areas that we're not intending to. A lot of in the Kubernetes world, I have these KPIs, which are KEPs, which are Kubernetes enhancement proposals, and you have to say this is a non-goal of this proposal. Like, this is what we don't want it to do, along with your goals. To not just to like put it in a box of saying like it's only supposed to do this. And I think that might be useful for us to do. Just to address Steve's concern, to be like, this is what we are going to do. This is what we don't want to do, just to like capture our scope.
I really like that. And just to keep going on Steve's point, because it was a really good one, part of the process on the design side that we go through is actually testing our product based on what we know the primary things are, to make sure that none of our new features actually made it harder. So we do have that final backstop of, all right, everyone still is able to do the primary function. We didn't get in anyone's way. And that's also a last ditch chance for us to say, oh no, we did make a primary job harder, we have to adjust. So we have several warning systems in place in case we accidentally do it. And then I think on top of that, adding Haley's idea would be great of, it's not meant to do this, it is only meant to do this. I think those two together will keep us safe from making users' jobs harder when we're trying to make them better.
That seems like, do we feel like that's worthwhile adding like a section onto our issue description to sort of say, hey, this is what we are not trying to solve here, Tim? Is that something, I feel like that's something I've seen already, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Yeah, usually when something is complicated or new, we put in what it will not do, or other considerations like that, but it's not part of the standard template. I think that's a good idea to talk about that always, like, what are the things we won't do? We do it in our strategy and direction pages. Yeah, I think for any new issues where we're breaking ground, I think that's really important to cover. like the MVC or the Epic for something new, yeah, I think that's good. I can make sure I can try and add that stuff in.
Cool. I might maybe I'll add an action item to the bottom of this to sort of trial that on the next time you're doing work on a new sort of feature thing. Does that sound okay? Or
Yeah.
do you want to add it here, or are you just going to take care of it?
No, you could add it. Yeah, it's good. And I think we're almost out of time. So any other comments before we wrap up? No?
Peeps hang around after we stop recording.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.